What is up, fantasy people? Welcome into hour 2 of the Fantasy Points Kickoff Megastream. I want to give a big shout out to Nick from Play to Win Fantasy for an incredible first hour. Make sure you follow him on Twitter at P2W Fantasy. But of course, for hour 2, I am Trav from True North Fantasy Football. You can find me. I am one half of the True North Fantasy Podcast, which is proud members of the Fantasy Points Media Group. You can check out all of our work at truenorthffb.com and follow us at truenorthffb. The pod account itself is at TNFF Pod, so you can find us there. My normal co-host, Tyrone McLaughlin, couldn't make it today, but with me on this fine Sunday morning where I'm at, it's about 9 a.m., got the coffee flowing. This man is one of the co-creators of the Sons of Dynasty, and they are True North family with their brand new DFS show, the Sons of DFS, debuting this past week on the TNFF network. You can find that content at truenorthffb.com/SOD. On the socials, you can find him rocking the Dynasty Sons account at Dynasty Sons, and personally at Dan Brown NFL. Downtown D Brown, how are you living this morning, my man?
You know, with an intro like that, Trav, I cannot complain. Really great to see the Fantasy Points Media Group and with such a stellar lineup on a beautiful day like today. Having an opportunity to come be a part of it was just something that really resonated well with me. And here I am getting to talk football with one of my best buds in the industry.
Yeah, man. Shout out to Mrs. Brown for allowing me to hijack a little bit of your Sunday. I know you like spending your Sundays on the farm with the boys, but we're talking football this morning, my man. You mentioned it there. I want to give a big thanks to the Fantasy Points team and Ben. He is the man behind the glass producing this entire show. You might hear on the Fantasy Points live streams, Graham and Scott and all the guys shouting Ben out. He is the man behind the scenes. I just want to say a big thanks to them. We're fired up to roll into this season with Fantasy Points supporting us. I got drafts coming up. Fantasy Points is going to be helping me with that. Not only do they help True North and support us there, but they can help us with our fantasy championships as well. So for anybody listening, if you haven't already, you need to go sign up at fantasypoints.com. They have elite resources from the absolute sharpest minds in the fantasy industry. They've got top-notch tools. They've got their DFS operation is absolutely second to none. So, I mean, if you like to profit, which I think we all like to profit, fantasypoints.com is a no-brainer. Our promo code with True North is 21 True North 10. That will get you 10% off on that subscription. And if anybody here's already signed up, go use that code and make sure you upgrade to the next tier of products to just keep leveling up your fantasy game. So I think if you want to score more, you can do that with fantasypoints.com. So thank you to Ben and all the team for all the support and for providing that for us fantasy gamers. Okay, D Brown, we're not gonna waste any more time. We're gonna get right into it. Our topic for tonight is going to be myth or manifestation. I'm gonna lay out some bold outcomes or statements that could potentially happen for this 2021 season, and we're just gonna talk about whether we think they're a myth and it ain't gonna happen, or whether we think it's a manifestation and this is something that we could see unfold right before our eyes. So I think it's gonna be fun. Are you ready to pitter patter, my man?
I'm ready, man. I always consider myself to have quite the imagination. Always have since I was a young lad. So throw out some bold statements at me. You might be surprised at things that I'm going to be agreeing to.
I love it. I can definitely confirm that imagination from the True North chat. Okay, the first one we're kicking off with, buddy, we're going to La La Land and the Los Angeles Rams. Cam Akers went down, which was super unfortunate. He was looking like a borderline top 10 fantasy running back for this season. Darrell Henderson was quickly inserted into that role and got an extreme boost to his ADP, let's say that. And then they brought in Sony Michel from the New England Patriots. The Patriots were rife with running backs, and so they were trying to offload Sony, and they were able to do so to the Rams. So the bold outcome that we could see potentially for this offense that I want to hear your take on, D Brown, would be Darrell Henderson and Sony Michel will both finish the year as top 30 running backs in PPR. And that's given health, of course, because there is some health issues with these fellas. But if they're healthy, do you think these two guys can give us top 30 PPR points, both of them?
Yeah, I mean, I think if, like you mentioned, given if they are healthy, but Henderson has suffered 3 injuries since August of 2020, including the most recent hand thumb sprain that he suffered. That's a total of 5 injuries in his NFL career that dates back to October of 2018. So health has not been one of Henderson's best attributes that he's brought into the next level. And now we're talking about another guy, Sony Michel, while he looked versatile this preseason, another guy that has an injury rap sheet that dates back to his college days. The Rams have obviously made the running back position a viable one over the years, just with the usage in the red zone alone. But so obviously there is a path there for these two to both have, potent weeks, any given week in the NFL. But I just don't know that I really want to bank on either two as far as my roster goes. But top 36, I don't feel like that's too high of a bar for these guys, just given the offense that they're in this year. The fact that Sony Michel will once again be having another rotational role, but this time in more of a high octane offense, I feel like that could bode well for him, as far as his production goes. Malcolm Brown covered 101 carries and 419 yards and 5 touchdowns. He also caught 23 of 33 passes for an additional 169 yards on offense. So there's plenty of meat on the bone for both of these two guys. And, there's not a whole lot behind them. Yes, I like the Jake Funk story as much as the next guy, but I don't think that he really showed us enough in preseason to say that he's going to be pulling anything away from these two so long as they stay healthy.
Yeah, I think that's perfectly put there. I think it's a two-man show, and I think that's good for fantasy gamers because we won't have to necessarily worry about that third fiddle coming in and kind of mucking everything up there. And I think you were spot on with your assessment that top 36 wouldn't be too out there, but I think top 30 for both of these guys is probably a little bit hefty. You also alluded to the Malcolm Brown pass catching last season, and that's, I think, the one thing that would have to happen for us to see this happen is that they would have to increase the passing volume to the running backs by a lot. If we look at their target distribution the past 3 seasons for the running backs, they were bottom 3 last year with only 12.6% targets to the running back, dead last in 2019 with only 10% to the running back. And in 2018, they were bottom 10, but it was like 17% passing to the running back. So if they could even get back to that 2018 life, I think we could potentially see top 30 for these guys, but it's going to hinge on that pass catching going up and a lot of explosiveness. Now, I think the explosiveness is what we will see from these guys. Darrell Henderson is that. He's kind of that big play guy. You give him a hole and he's going to get you those chunk plays. And Sony, like, he kind of has a bad rap because of the knees, because we loved the explosiveness coming out, but it doesn't seem like he's had that necessarily with New England. But if you look at last year, he actually had the 5th highest explosive run rate of any running back in 2020. And that's the percentage of his runs that went for 10 plus yards. So he was breaking off some big plays in New England behind that good offensive line. I don't think it's as good in LA, but I think given health, I would definitely put the bar at top 36. And I do think that the top 31 is a little bit bold, and I wouldn't quite be willing to go there just yet, my man. Okay, so number 2, we are going to play with mine and Ben's heartstrings. Of course, Ben, the director of operations for Fantasy Points, is a Birds fan, as am I. And this one is, I don't know if it's that bold necessarily, but I think it's, a very interesting bar that is set for these players because there's a lot of change in Philly with Jalen Hurts coming in, new wide receivers. Zach Ertz is there when we didn't necessarily think he was going to be there. Miles Sanders has some more competition with Kenny Gainwell. Boston Scott's looking good. So it's just, there's a lot of new, not to mention that coaching staff with Nick Sirianni. So this bold statement here, D Brown, is that the Eagles will have a top 20 wide receiver in 2021. The wide receiver position has been much maligned in Philly. So I'm curious to hear what you think about this one.
Yeah, believe it or not, Trav, I actually think that there is a chance we will see an Eagles wide receiver finish in the top 20 this year, and that's my man Slim Reaper Smith.
Yes.
This is something unlike anything that Sirianni has ever worked with in the past. He's never had a top tier talent like Smith come in and be successful in his offense, but he has had success with guys that weren't even as talented as the young Devonta Smith. The Eagles have one of the youngest wide receiver cores in the NFL, one of the least experienced, if you will, with Smith, Rager, and Quez. All three of them have accounted for 512 receiving yards and 2 touchdowns on 38 receptions to this point. And that was Rager for the most part this past season. So now you've got Smith, Rager, and even Quez, who I think is more of a nice story, deep threat kind of guy that can really open the field for these other guys to work underneath. And think about the weapons that now Jalen Hurts, who I've long been a fan of coming into this year, has to work underneath. I mean, the Eagles actually do have a potent offense at this point. While it's not one that I think is going to see, top 5, even top 10 volume through the air, I think with what Jalen Hurts can do with his legs and the efficiency around the play action game can really bode well for a receiver like Devonta Smith here in 2021.
That is the vote of confidence that I am looking for, D Brown. I appreciate that. And I do see this being a potent offense because it is fast. I think they're like a kind of like a small, fast. I think it is like a basketball lineup when you got that small, fast lineup, like the Warriors were running out in their championship years, kind of like that. I do like that speed element, but I think it's going to be kind of like potently spread out personally. So I actually have this one as a myth. It hurts me a little bit to say, but I do think they're going to run the ball a little bit more. I think just with the tea leaves of bringing Zach Ertz back, it looks like they're going to be running a heavy dose of 2 tight end sets and running the ball. And one thing that was kind of telling there, and we talked a little bit about it on the True North pod this past week, was that the Eagles keeping JJ Arcega-Whiteside over Travis Fulgham was purely a run blocking move. Essentially, JJ Arcega-Whiteside's a good blocker for whatever he is. He's a good blocker. He's a big body. He actually, I'll give him a little bit of credit that he did moss a fool in one of those preseason games, but that's about the most credit that I'm going to give to JJ Arcega-Whiteside. But I just feel like with the offensive line getting a little bit of health as well, I think they're going to really try and run that ball. I love Devonta Smith. I love Jalen Reagor. But I think that we're going to see, much like years past for Philly wide receivers, we're going to see a really spread out target distribution. And unfortunately, what that's going to result in is a bunch of mediocre stat lines come the end of the season. I just think we're going to see maybe a couple of like 65 for 750 to 904 or something like that out of these wide receivers. The Birds haven't had a 1,000 yard wide receiver since 2014 in Jeremy Maclin, which is obviously like worlds apart, way different regimes and whatnot. But there is a little bit of linkage to Andy Reid with Nick Sirianni. And of course, he was with the Colts the past 2 seasons and with Frank Reich previous, who has Doug Peterson ties. So it was so very Howie to make that hire with some of those entanglements there and not move into a completely new regime, but try and hang on after maybe he was a little bit scared after the Chip Kelly experiment. But if you look at Nick Sirianni's offenses the last couple of years in Indianapolis, it was spread out as well. T.Y. Hilton was the highest producing wide receiver as far as yardage, with just a little bit over 700 yards last year over the past 2 seasons in Indy. So I think for this one, D, I would love to be wrong on this one, but I personally think this one's going to be a myth. I am curious before we roll off into the next one. What do you think the tight end distribution is going to look like with Zach Ertz coming back? Like, is he going to render Dallas Goedert not someone that we want to use? Or do you think the upside of what Dallas Goedert can do on his own is still enough that you might target him? And what's your temperature on Zach Ertz himself?
I mean, to be honest, at this point, I was really hopeful that Ertz was going to move on, maybe get shipped out to somewhere else that he could become useful, a Buffalo, if you will. But as I mentioned over and over again, 2 relevant tight ends is not a relevant tight end for me in fantasy football. And unfortunately, with both of them there, I don't think that either one is a player that I want to be sticking into my lineup regularly in 2021. So yeah. I was rising high on Goddard, like many were this off season, in hopes that Ertz would move on. But the moment that we found out he's staying, it was a huge damper for Dallas Goedert and his outlook this year.
Yeah, I'm totally with you. I think what it's going to be relegated to now is that it'll give you a week to week tight end one, but we're not going to know which one of these guys it's going to be, right? One week we're going to see Dallas Goedert take a short route for 70 yards and a touchdown and explode. And then the following week, we're going to see Zach Ertz get 4 catches for 26 yards and 2 touchdowns, and he's going to be the top 12 tight end. So it's going to be an interesting little shakeout there. I too was rising high on Dallas Goedert. I think I took him in the 7th round of a best ball league that we were doing with the fantasy points team. And I was trying to make a nice little Jalen Hurts stack there. And I took Dallas Goedert in like the 7th or 8th round. And it didn't necessarily work out for me the way that I had hoped, because I too thought, I was thinking like even obviously there was talk about Zach Ertz going to Indy, but even Arizona ran some of the most 2 tight end sets last year, which is just wild because they didn't have a tight end producer really. But that was a spot that I was thinking he could go and get some volume as well. But no such luck, and Zach Ertz will be unfortunately a thorn in the side of Dallas Goedert, and I think a thorn in the side of this entire offense really. Like I think it was a little bit more of a clearer picture, and it's just wild that a player with such little upside stays there and has so much impact on what these guys are going to do by the end of the season. So it's a lot in flux for the Birds, but as a fan, I am hopeful. As a fantasy gamer, I am a little bit hesitant on buying in at cost or even above cost on some of these guys. So,
well, and the main thing is this offseason, as I mentioned, I've been buying into Jalen Hurts, and he's the one guy that I'm still buying into. While it doesn't feel great, buying into the ADPs of his weapons around him, we just know the floor is there with Jalen Hurts. And if the weapons do click, any of them, Smith, the 2 tight ends, that can really help bail him out in some situations. So Jalen Hurts, I'm still buying with confidence at this point heading into the year.
Yeah, I would definitely echo that sentiment just because of the floor that he's going to give you with his legs as well, right? I think he averaged like 68 rushing yards in his 4 starts last season, which, that equates to like an 800 plus rushing yard season for a quarterback. So that's deadly. And I recently just had one of my home league drafts, and he's really nice because if there's any drafts left, he's one of those guys that you can get after that first couple of tiers of quarterback that offers you that rushing upside, which we know if we're watching the True North Fantasy Pod and if we're listening to the Fantasy Points content as well, you want the quarterback with the rushing upside. So that's a really good point to point out that Jalen Hurts is still somebody that we want to target, because if you don't get one of those top guys in the first 6 rounds or so, then you can wait a little bit later and you still get some of that upside. Maybe not the passing game upside, but at least he's going to be doing some work on the ground for you. And then the passing game stuff is just a little added bonus that if he exceeds expectations, we're absolutely laughing. So, okay, the next one, D Brown, it might not be too bold because this guy did finish there last year, but the running back landscape is very interesting. And this is a player that has admittedly been dogged a little bit on the True North Fantasy Pod in the past, but I am willing to change my tune personally. But the bold statement here, David Montgomery will finish as a top 10 running back this season. Not necessarily that bold. He finished as the running back 4 last year. And I think I'm going to kick this one off and say that I think this is going to manifest, D Brown. I mentioned that we've previously been haters on the True North Pod. It's, I guess, well documented if you listen to our stuff, but we always preach, like I said, we got to be water and make sure that we are adapting to the landscape across fantasy. And this guy has proven me wrong. He can get it done as a starting NFL running back and take on a 3-down role. And I think this Bears offense is going to need him clicking on all cylinders to be successful. The key pieces for me in that are that Tariq Cohen will miss 6 games after being on the pup, and Justin Fields will eventually come in as the quarterback. And I think both of those things are just incredible for David Montgomery, continuing what we saw at the back half of last season. If you look at Cohen being gone, I think we're just all but assured that David Montgomery is going to get a serious pass catching workload. I know they've got Damian Williams, but I'm personally not super worried about Damian Williams. I know that there is the Matt Nagy connection, but I think the trust that was built with David Montgomery last year was pretty easy to see. And I don't think Damian Williams is the caliber that's going to come in and take a significant piece of that, where he's going to come in and say, get all the targets that Tariq Cohen would have got, or he's going to put a dent in the carry volume where David Montgomery isn't going to get his customary 225 plus carries. That's going to happen. And the trust that I'm talking about showed because the Bears only gave 88 targets to running backs last year, D Brown. David Montgomery, he got 68 of those 88 targets to running backs last year. So I think they just show that they can have him in that role. He can produce, and that they trust him. If you look at the games where he got at least 5 targets, he averaged 17.3 PPR points per game, and that was 4th on a per game basis. So the guy's done it. He's just done it. They trust him like that, and I think they're going to target him that way and use him heavily in the run game. What are you thinking, though? I know you're a big Justin Fields fan, so we can shake out the Fields impact a little bit there, D-Round. But what are you thinking as far as this David Montgomery as a top 10 running back in 2021?
Yeah, this is one that I kind of struggled with a little bit. While I do consider David Montgomery to be a value with where he is going in drafts right now, top 10, it's not an easy feat. And we've been riding the narratives with Montgomery since the end of last year, when the Bears averaged 144 rushing yards in their final 6 games, which was 4th in the NFL during that span. After they made attempts to reestablish their offensive line, things started clicking. But we've heard it a bunch of times. A lot of that success came from some of the worst run defense teams in the league. You had the Lions 28th, Texans 32nd, Vikings 27th, Jags 30th. So, we're riding high off of what Monty did this past year without Cohen in the picture. And here enough, we are coming into this year, Cohen not in the picture. But I am of the belief that Damian Williams is a little bit of a thorn in Montgomery's side. Damian Williams, while he seems like he's been a Jag his whole career, he has produced when given an opportunity. And that is also in the receiving game as well. So I think that he almost stands to be more of a thorn in Montgomery's side than Cohen would be if Cohen was back. At least we know what Cohen is and what his role is. I feel like Damian Williams, all it's going to take is one injury away from Montgomery or getting a little banged up, or Damian Williams just coming in as the 2 punch and really showing some gas in the tank before these guys are really kind of hinging off of each other, really capping the upside that Montgomery was able to capitalize on this past year when there wasn't anybody other than a Ryan Nall sitting there keeping the bench warm. So, while I like Montgomery and his price, I don't think that we will see him finish as a top 10 this season.
Yeah, that's interesting. And I think Damian Williams is like a very pivotal factor in that, because now that I'm thinking, like, they don't really have much behind him. Khalil Herbert, I think, is the rookie running back that made the depth chart.
And he looked decent in preseason.
Yeah. So good for him there. And it's, it's kind of like an agree to disagree situation where I think if you're in my camp and you're not seeing Damian Williams as that guy, then I think you would probably say that top 10 is well within the range of outcomes. So I think that's a really good debate to be had, and we'll definitely see it play out, because Damian Williams coming back from being off for a year, he did show that explosiveness in Kansas City. I would maybe contend that this isn't the Kansas City offense, but I think we all know that. And with volume comes production regardless. So it'll be an interesting one to see where the volume is. The one other factor is just Justin Fields. I know you love Justin Fields, D Brown. So let's just, dote on him a little bit. I think one of the big knocks for David Montgomery was that, he's going to break a bunch of tackles. He can break tackles with the best of them in the league. He just wasn't an efficient runner. He was going to break the tackle, but he wasn't running away from nothing after that. And I think what Justin Fields does, especially in the RPO game, is he is going to kind of bake in some of those big plays for David Montgomery, in that the defense is going to be paying attention to Justin Fields to see if he actually hands it off or whether he's going to run it himself, because he's absolutely electric on the ground. And I think some of that could just bake in the big plays for David Montgomery, and I guess for Damian Williams if he does get in there. But I still think this one's going to manifest, and they're going to continue to ride Monty with Justin Fields, see what he can do, right? Matt Nagy really needs this offense to start humming if he wants to stick around and see these pieces come to fruition. Now that he's finally got some good pieces in place, he can't mess this up, man.
Yeah, no, it's I'm huge into Justin Fields. I'm ready for him to be named the starter. We're seeing all these other rookie quarterbacks, and it seems like the 2 quarterbacks that we were drooling over most around rookie draft time are the 2 that we're kind of in a holding pattern for before we can really capitalize on these rookie years. But just what Justin Fields can bring to that running game that Andy Dalton cannot. It's a night and day difference. And as you mentioned, the efficiency with Monty, it would most definitely go up with a Justin Fields. While he may lose a little bit of volume, Justin Fields is probably going to use his legs a good bit more, but that alone is what's going to allow Monty to flourish when he is getting the rock.
Yeah, no, I think that's a great assessment. And I just can't wait to see Justin Fields in there, because I understand that Andy Dalton's trying to play Mr. Cool with the beard and the visor and stuff, but he just needs to give way to the rookie, because this is the newness. This is what's going to take that team to where they want to be. So they might as well get him in there. And I mean, they got him for an absolute steal in the draft. So I understand where, they don't necessarily need to rush him in, because I don't think we're going to say that this is a championship team right away with Justin Fields in there, but come on, get him in there. Like, this guy was a consensus, like top 8 pick previously. So it's essentially the same as if you took the guy in the first 5 picks. So just get him on the field, guys. Come on.
Right. I mean, I can even understand the Lance and Jimmy G argument a lot more so than I can the Justin Fields and Andy Dalton. I mean, I don't think that they're fooling anybody. Hopefully it's Dalton week 1, and then Fields just goes ahead and runs the season out. But, Matt Nagy, his chair is getting hot, very hot at this point. So I think Justin Fields is his best opportunity to save his job.
Mm-hmm. You might say it's red hot with Andy Dalton being put in there as the starter.
I like that.
So from one young running quarterback, D Brown, we are going to move to another young running quarterback who has taken the league by an absolute storm this past season, and that would be Josh Allen of the Buffalo Bills. And the bold statement, or potential bold outcome here, is that Josh Allen will finish outside of the top 5 quarterbacks in 2021. Do you think that's a myth, or do you think that there is an avenue where that could manifest itself, brother?
I think that is 100% a myth right there. Josh Allen is here to stay in the top 5. I mean, this past year, we saw just how good Josh Allen can be. His opponent adjusted total QBR of 81.7, which was 3rd in the NFL, ranks as the 12th highest in the league since 2006. Okay. And let's attribute this to offensive coordinator Brian Daboll. His attack finished with the NFL's highest passing rate on first downs when it was within a 1 score on every first down occasion, according to Sharp Football. This offense just meshes so well with a superstar quarterback, if you will, who also is known to be able to punish guys on the ground with his legs. You mix those two, and it's a perfect storm for a top 5 quarterback. Brian Daboll's passing attack, I don't know that they're going to run the ball at all in 2021. So you mix that in with what Josh Allen is capable with on the ground, and you're calling him outside top 5. That's crazy.
Yeah,
that's crazy talk right there. Josh Allen's got top 5 in his blood in 2021.
Yeah, Josh Allen is a top 5 quarterback in his sleep, folks. Yeah, this was more just like a trying to bait you in for one, just to see what you thought, maybe, D Brown, but I got this one as a myth as well. I will say, like, I do think there's going to be some regression coming. That was almost a perfect season last year with over 4,500 yards, 37 touchdowns, 10 picks, 102 rushes for 420 rushing yards, and 8 touchdowns. The guy hasn't run for less than 8 touchdowns in a season in his career, which is absolutely insane. So just that being baked in, like I said, top 5 in his sleep, right? They added weapons for him in Emmanuel Sanders. Well, I guess just Emmanuel Sanders they added for him, but that's a nice little versatile veteran weapon to come in there. You got Cole Beasley, Gabriel Davis looks like he's set to boom. And then, of course, Stephon Diggs. I wouldn't argue with anybody who told me they have him as their number 1 receiver for this year. And even in dynasty leagues, like I love me some Stephon Diggs. So the pieces are around him. Brian Daboll, like you said, they got so lucky with him not getting the head coaching job. When he goes out the door, that's when we should probably worry, depending on who they bring in. Like, this team ran the most 4 wide receiver sets of any team, and that also just spells top 5 quarterback, So I think this is a myth, although I do see we might see a little bit of regression from him. I think the regression might come more in that rushing touchdown department, just because A, like, it's absurd to keep that going, and B, they just paid the man a buttload of money. And so I think they might want to protect that investment, especially around the goal line a little bit, just to make sure that they're not, putting his head in the pile there, getting him ready to get popped. Like you don't want to derail this career. Like if you, it's kind of like a loose comparison, but if you look at that Carson Wentz ACL injury, which I think was what kind of put him on that downturn from an MVP caliber player into what we see today, obviously was an inside the 5-yard run where he went in against the Rams. He got chopped in the legs, and that was a long recovery, and it wasn't the same situation that he came back to. So I think it's something that the Bills really need to be conscious of, because you don't want to ruin this, because he is so bloody exciting to watch, man. You were mentioning that you don't think they're going to run the ball at all this year. I think that would be absolutely, just Devin Singletary and Zach Moss just do absolutely nothing. I don't necessarily think that's the case, but I do see exactly what you see, that he's going to cap that regardless of whether he's got 30 carries inside the 5 or not. Like he's going to cap what they do between the 20s with his arm and with his legs. And then at the goal line, you never really know what they're going to do in there. I'm curious though, who do you think is the second wide receiver for the Bills before we move off of Josh Allen behind Stephon Diggs? Do you think Emmanuel Sanders has a shot at creeping in on that, or is it Gabe or Cole?
I just don't know that Emmanuel Sanders is really at the level where he can produce what it would take to be the two. Now, if Diggs gets peppered like he did this past season, we're talking about a large drop off from the 1 to the 2, and maybe Emmanuel Sanders can be that guy if all the cards fall correctly. But I tend to really want to push my chips behind Gabriel. Did you see that preseason touchdown pass from Josh Allen? I mean, he put that ball on a rope out there, and it was a thing of beauty. I just think that Gabriel presents such a higher ceiling in that offense than either of the other two mentioned. And while many of us want him to be that too and really take a step forward, maybe it is a little bit of wishful thinking. But if I'm going to really bet on either of those guys to really reach new heights in this offense, I think Gabriel is the guy that I'm touching.
Yeah, for sure. I think it's the floor versus ceiling call, right? Like I think Cole Beasley and Emmanuel Sanders will have some decent floor, but they're not really going to be able to turn that floor into a ceiling. Whereas Gabriel Davis might have a floor of 0, but the guy's ceiling is, top 24 wide receiver in this offense, if not challenge for top 20. I think if things fall his way, because Cole Beasley, we've seen him do it. I think he was a top 24 wide receiver with Stephon Diggs producing as well. So we've seen it in Buffalo, and the way they run this offense with Brian Daboll, I don't think we necessarily are going to see a whole lot different. It's just don't be disappointed if these otherworldly numbers that we saw last year just come down a little bit, like we saw it with Patrick Mahomes. And it's kind of a normal that's a factor of life, folks. That's a life lesson for you, is that regression will happen in fantasy football, and that's just the way she goes. So we're going to go to New Orleans. We're sticking with quarterbacks, buddy. We're going to New Orleans, and we're going to talk about old crab daddy himself, Jameis Winston. He was in, eating them W's. So Jameis was named the starter for the New Orleans Saints, and it still remains to be seen what this offense is going to look like. But what I will say is this is what we wanted to have, or what I definitely wanted to happen, especially for this offense, is Taysom's great. He can help them win games. He personally can be a good fantasy quarterback, but I think all boats just sink a little bit with him in there. Whereas with Jameis, I think we could see a little bit of flourishing from this offense. And this bold statement here, D Brown, is that Jameis Winston can be a top 12 quarterback with New Orleans this year. And I think this is interesting because he doesn't offer that rushing upside that we're seeing from more and more top 12 quarterbacks. I think we've seen like 2 quarterbacks per year over the last 3 or 4 years without 250 rushing yards hit that top 12. Might not be top 12, so don't quote me on that 100%, but moral of the story is not rushing equals a harder chance of getting into the top 12. So what say you, my man?
I think the top 12 was spot on, because I teeter back and forth right in that range. Obviously, we know what Jameis Winston is capable as far as putting the ball down the field and really capitalizing on the passing game. Jameis Winston, he's the 130 for 30 that ESPN just wasn't ready for. Becoming the first player in league history to throw for 30 interceptions and 30 touchdowns in the same season. So we know what we're getting here, and that's a very high variance of outcomes with Jameis Winston. And that's not including the fact that Taysom Hill still is in the picture. We don't really know what this offense is going to look like as far as the Taysom Hill usage goes. So red zone, goal line areas that could really take away from Winston's ceiling. And while I recognize that Winston does like to throw the ball deep and really spread that ball around, Callaway is a great story coming up here, but I just don't know that they have enough receiving options there to really hit that height for top 12. So I'm calling this one a myth. Just enough red flags on the situation alone to keep my expectations tempered.
And like I would echo that sentiment, but don't you wish it were different? Like my heart just wants to say that this one's going to manifest itself, because I think Jameis Winston producing at that level is just good for fantasy football. His style of YOLO ball is just, it's next level. It's part of why I'm excited to see Ryan Fitzpatrick get the starting gig in Washington with those weapons as well. Like it's just fun to watch a guy just hurling it up there and not given the F, right? So I think this one's a myth as well. I think maybe if Michael Thomas was healthy, we might be able to call this one a manifestation, but I still think they're going to run the ball pretty heavily. They have done so the past couple of seasons, and I think they're going to continue to do that, partially to limit the mistakes that Jameis makes, and partially just because that's what works for this offense. Like Alvin Kamara is really good. Tony Jones Jr. has looked decent in the preseason. It looks like he's going to get a shot to be the backup here. Latavius Murray is still there, and he's produced in the past as well. So I think that's what the recipe calls for, especially with that offensive line. I do think that we're going to see a far more explosive passing offense even with that. But I think, compared to what we were expecting from Taysom, that far more explosive doesn't mean crazy explosive, right? I think we're just going to see a lot more downfield passing than what we would have seen, but it's not necessarily going to be up there with the Tom Brady's and the maybe even like a Justin Herbert throwing downfield. It's not going to be up on that level necessarily, because they are going to want to limit those mistakes. But I think he needs too many things to fall his way, including at least 40 touchdowns thrown for him to be reaching those heights of top 12. So, top 15, I could say, okay, but top 12 is a little hefty just because he doesn't offer that upside. And I think this offense, we'll still see some of that conservative play that we saw towards the end of Drew Brees' career. What do you think about Traquan before we ride out of this one? Because Traquan's a guy who we've loved in the past, and I think Jameis bodes well for him, but it hasn't looked great. And I know Marquez Callaway's profiling to be the main target there, but do you think Traquan's going to give us anything with Michael Thomas out?
Yeah, no, I mean, all the opportunities there for Traquan. I know he got a little injured during the preseason and wasn't able to get as many reps and afforded Marquez Callaway the opportunity to step up, and he did not disappoint. So I think Callaway has definitely usurped Traquan at this point heading into week one. But Traquan very well could be at the receiving end of some of the stuff that we were seeing from Winston in preseason. So, and Traquan Slick forgot about it at this point. Everybody's kind of really after Callaway, but there's not anybody outside of him unless you're wanting to pull the trigger on Michael Thomas and have him sitting at the bottom of the bench for the first 8 weeks of the season. Yeah. So I think Traquan Smith still has plenty of opportunity. And as you mentioned, with Winston under center, it's a lot prettier of an option.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, 100%, man. So from New Orleans, who lost a previously elite wide receiver, we're going to move down to Tennessee, who brought in an elite wide receiver in Julio Jones. Obviously, one of your heartthrobs, I know, is AJ Brown. He should be everybody's freaking heartthrob. This guy's incredible. And then you are a Georgia boy, an Atlanta Falcons fan. Julio Jones was your guy. I also know that. And he's down in Tennessee with another one of your guys. So I think as far as if he was to leave the Falcons, I think he landed in a good place for, that where you can still root for him. But what do you think here? This is the bold outcome. AJ Brown and Julio Jones will both finish at top 12 among the wide receivers for the Titans this season. Is that a myth, or is that going to manifest?
I think that unfortunately that is a myth. But let me just say, you mentioned Julio Jones going up there to the Titans. The Titans have been adopted as my secondary team. I'm right up here in North Georgia. I am literally 20 minutes away from the Tennessee line. I've gone to, I'm a big hockey guy, so I went to tons of Nashville Predators games. And of course, throughout that, I've also been going to some Titans games as well. So to see Julio go to Tennessee, what was great for me, and not only that, but just to be paired up with another one of my favorite wide receivers in the league, AJ Brown. He's one of the top receivers in the league right now. In the past 2 seasons alone, he's caught 122 of 190 targets for 2,126 yards and 20 total touchdowns. Finished as a wide receiver 1 in 43% of his 14 active games last year. He is everything that you're looking for in today's NFL wide receiver. A perfect package mix of route running, yak ability, and contested catch ability. And now he gets to join with one of the all-decade past team wide receivers, one of the greatest to ever play the game as far as I'm concerned. And Ryan Tannehill gets to flourish with that. Tennessee lost receivers Corey Davis, Adam Humphries, tight end Jonnu Smith this offseason. Well, that trio right there combined for 192 targets. And Tannehill set franchise records last year with 40 touchdowns, 33 being passing and 7 on the ground. So, there's lots of fantasy points to be had there in Tennessee. And I think they're just going to continue doing what they're doing. Even with the loss of Arthur Smith, I don't think the offense is going to change. The offense just got better. And instead of Corey Davis, you have a Julio Jones on the other side. It really comes down to, can Julio Jones stay healthy at this point in his career? We know when he's out there, he's going to be great, and he's going to allow AJ Brown to, AJ Brown, what he did this past season, they knew they were going to throw it to AJ Brown, and he was still able to make a lot of these defensive backs, look silly at times. So, having Julio Jones out there is just going to bode well for AJ Brown. Unfortunately, though, I think that both of them being top 12 wide receivers this year, it is a little bit lofty. Derrick Henry is still one of the focal points in that Titans offense, and I don't see them going away from that. Like I said, I think they're just going to keep chugging along. Same system that we saw this past year. It's just a mix up of the vacated targets, and Julio Jones is going to serve up a bunch of those.
Yeah, no, I like that. And for some of those reasons, D Brown, I think this one is going to manifest is where I'm at. I think obviously, given you touched on the health, given the health, I totally will put that caveat on it. They got to stay healthy, especially Julio Jones. But I think even in a lower passing volume offense, I think these guys could both see 30% of the target volume. I don't think any running back here is going to get significant targets. Josh Reynolds does not worry me. And neither does Anthony Firkser really. Now, we know you mentioned it there. You laid it all out for AJB that he is a touchdown monster. And I think we could see a bit of a touchdown renaissance for Julio Jones in Tennessee. So looking at all those guys that departed, 14 of Tennessee's 26 red zone touchdowns are out the door. So that leaves 14, potential touchdowns there for somebody to take. And at the quarterback position, if you look at Ryan Tannehill, he actually had the 7th highest completion percentage in the red zone. And 26 of those 33 touchdowns you mentioned came in the red zone to only 2 interceptions. So I think there's some real baked in efficiency when it gets near the goal line here, even though it's not a high volume passing offense there, because Derrick Henry is like what you would draw up as a goal line running back or somebody to run it within the red zone. But I just think there's still room with those guys leaving, even if they don't change this offense at all, for Julio and AJ Brown to have, as far as duos go in the NFL, I think they're probably going to have the highest percentage of their team's targets. I think Julio could capitalize on some of that in the red zone. He only had 8 red zone targets in Atlanta last year and only 1 inside the 10. So I think that's kind of criminal usage for how good he is, because previously when he's been used in the red zone, he has produced with some touchdowns. I think he had 5 red zone touchdowns each of the past 2 seasons. So I Yeah, I really like what they're doing in Tennessee. We're gonna start flying here, D Brown. I'm gonna keep us moving along. I think this might be the boldest one that we have on here, and that would be in Carolina, going to their rookie wide receiver Terrace Marshall. And this bold outcome is that Terrace Marshall finishes 2021 as the top scoring rookie wide receiver. What do you think about that?
I said that that is indeed a myth. I was high on Terrace Marshall coming in to the scouting process. Uh, really do like the landing spot for him and his long term outlook in the NFL. But DJ Moore, Robbie Anderson, still there. I presume both of them are ahead of him in the pecking order, and we also have Christian McCaffrey there, who we know is really going to be the butter that churns down there in Carolina. So while I like Terrace Marshall, he absolutely balled this preseason, and I think that they are going to look to get him involved year one. I just don't know with guys like Waddle and Smith out there who could probably demand a little bit bigger piece of their target share. I just don't know that Terrace Marshall, he'd have to essentially get double-digit touchdowns for this to even come close, I believe. So I'm buying Terrace Marshall late in drafts, but I don't see him being the top rookie wide receiver in 2021.
It's another one, D Brown. I'm calling it. I'm calling it. This one's going to manifest. This is going to manifest. It is well documented on our show that I am a huge Terrace Marshall fan. My favorite wide receiver out of this class. I think he was my wide receiver 4. And I just think as a talent, I think if you look at the class, like it was a bunch of slot guys and then Jamar Chase, right? A bunch of undersized slot guys and then Jamar Chase. And the next guy that profiled with that alpha skill set was Terrace Marshall for me. I just think he can move around. He did work in the slot. He did work outside. He can work down the field. He can work after the catch. He scores a ton of touchdowns. He's got 23 touchdowns the past 2 seasons at LSU. One of those years was with Joe Burrow, but that was behind Jefferson and Chase. And then the past year was without Joe Burrow when the offense didn't look nearly as good. And he only played 7 games, but he scored 10 touchdowns in that shortened season. So I just think the guy is such a talent. The situation is really good. Obviously, CMC coming back, he's going to be battling for targets. But I think if he can get 100 targets, I think in a Joe Brady offense, that's very lucrative. And we've already seen a lot of flashes in the preseason. He looks healthy. They let David Moore go. I think David Moore being let go is directly related to Terrace Marshall's health and his emergence. And if you look, you mentioned the touchdowns and he's going to have to score them. I think he can in this offense. They only threw the ball 40% of the time in the red zone. So that was, I think, bottom 5 lowest in the NFL. So I think that can go up. Even with Christian McCaffrey coming back, like I think just the passing volume in the red zone probably will go up a little bit. And if you look at Terrace Marshall's prowess, at LSU, those 23 touchdowns in the last 2 seasons, 15 of those were scored in the red zone. So, and he also had 2 51-yarders and a 75. So that just shows that he's a very versatile asset who has a new quarterback coming in that I don't think is going to be any worse than Teddy Bridgewater was last year. So I am calling it. Terrace Marshall is going to finish as the highest scoring fantasy producer at the wide receiver position among rookies in 2021, D Brown.
So at that point, then that almost tells me that you are buying into Sam Darnold for 2021.
I am.
I mean, if you're buying the wide receiver 3 in that offense, obviously you're pretty gun heavy about those weapons there in Carolina. Is Sam Darnold enough to make you hesitate as far as locking him in as a quarterback for 2021? Or is that a guy that you're still not really wanting a piece of under center, even though you are salivating at the thought of his options?
Totally. I want him, but I'm not like saying that I want him as my starting quarterback in a 1 quarterback league. I think he can be a strong contributor as a quarterback 2 in a super flex league. And if we look at last year, Teddy Bridgewater put out 3 top 25 wide receivers while only throwing 15 touchdowns and 11 picks. And I think Sam Darnold can do that. He's going to make mistakes. We know he's going to make mistakes. He's going to see ghosts, but he's going to go down the field more so than Teddy Bridgewater, I think. And I think that can lead to some more touchdowns, hopefully to Terrace Marshall. So that's kind of why I'm sitting there. I am bullish on Sam Darnold versus the consensus this season. I see the potential downside, but I just want pieces of this Joe Brady, Matt Rule offense because I've seen what it can do with mediocre quarterback play. So if we get above average quarterback play, I think we're laughing here. Okay, D Brown, we got a few more minutes left. Just want to thank everybody from Fantasy Points and all of the loyal listeners for tuning in. This is going to be our last bold outcome for the night. We got about a 5 spot on this one, D Brown. So this one here, Clyde Edwards-Helaire finishes 2021 as a top 5 running back. He was being drafted almost as such last year, and then it's tempered a little bit this year after what we saw in 2020. But, we've lost some pieces amongst the running back landscape with Cam Akers and J.K. Dobbins going down. Do you think some of that might open up for Clyde to finish as a top 5 running back in 2021? Or is that maybe a little bit of a hefty outcome?
Yeah, I mean, I guess after we've been through all these, I kind of feel like a little bit of a Nelly. Every single one of these, I've been on the downside. I don't see him finishing.
That's why they're bold.
5. That just feels a little too steep for the usage that we've seen from that position on that offense the past couple of years. We all had high hopes for Clyde Edwards-Helaire. And it didn't really come to fruition. I don't know that position is necessarily what we were all wanting it to be. The main thing we would need to see is a large uptick in the passing department out of Clyde Edwards-Helaire. And I don't think if we don't see that, I don't see him. He'd be lucky to get top 10 numbers if the targets don't uptick substantially here this year.
Yeah, I think you're spot on. And it's something that I've been kind of looking into since he was drafted, because Ty and I on the show had a little bit of spirited debate about Jonathan Taylor versus Clyde Edwards-Helaire. And if you look at Clyde's 55 targets from last year, that's the most that any single running back has gotten from Patrick Mahomes. And then if you look back in the Andy Reid era in Kansas City, the most that any one running back has gotten is 63 targets in that immaculate season from Kareem Hunt the other season. So it's not like we're getting CMC target volume upside in this offense as much as we love the efficiency that it creates. And as far as the run game, they just don't run the ball a ton. They were bottom 10 in overall attempts. They had the 4th highest pass to rush ratio overall and the 7th highest when they had the lead. So even when they're ahead, they are throwing the ball. And then they have the 10th highest pass rate in the red zone. So even when they're getting close to pay dirt, they're still throwing the ball. It's kind of like the Bills offense we were talking. They just don't run it that much. And I think with Darrell Williams and Jerick McKinnon there, I think those guys will take a little bit of work here and there. Jerick McKinnon, especially in that passing game, which isn't crazy voluminous. So I think if we're betting on Clyde to finish that top 5, we're going to be disappointed. So this one for me, I'll be a Nelly too, D Brown. This one is a myth. And I just don't think it'll shake out. I think Clyde's going to be great. I think he'll be, that top 12, top 15 running back, and we'll offer some upside from, every couple of weeks. But I think we're going to see some down weeks from him, unfortunately, just because of the way that Patrick Mahomes can go down the field to his other receiving weapons at will.
Yeah, well, the one thing that he does have going is the rebuilding of that offensive line.
Yeah,
that alone it should do wonders for the offense. So you've got that, and you've got what we like to tout when we are talking about Clyde Edwards-Helaire, and that's the prolific offense that should put him in position to see in important, meaningful snaps. And so those two things alone obviously present the opportunity for the sky's the limit, as far as I'm concerned, to anybody attached to that team. I just don't know that Andy Reid and Patrick Mahomes have shown us that they make that position a priority over Tyreek Hill and Travis Kelce.
Yeah, for sure. Tyreek Hill and Travis Kelce over the last 2 seasons have each taken over 50% of the team's targets. So I think that even makes it hard for somebody like Mecole to come in and produce as well. So I think it's just those other 2 guys are the ones you mainly want. And the other guys, you're just going to have to be prepared to be disappointed in certain weeks. So that does it for the show today, D Brown. I am so thankful that you were able to make it today. It was a blast chatting with you. Always is when we can get in on the airwaves, my man. Thank you to Ben and the team at Fantasy Points. Remember, our promo code for fantasypoints.com is 21TrueNorth10, all capitals, 21TrueNorth10. Get 10% off the elite resources and tools and analysis over at fantasypoints.com and hashtag score more. I am, of course, Trav. Find me at TCL14. The work is at TrueNorthFFB.com. And you can find us on Twitter at TrueNorthFFB. This man, D Brown, can be found at Dan Brown NFL and catch the Sons of DFS every Thursday at, I believe, 7 o'clock Eastern, D Brown?
9 o'clock Eastern.
9 o'clock Eastern. Same time as we're at on Wednesdays. So Wednesdays, you watch us. Thursdays, you watch the Boys from Sons DFS, and you're going to be locked up for the week of fantasy football. So thanks again, D Brown. I appreciate you joining.
Absolutely.
And last